Hello, this is ChrisKool, and this is my classic deck. I feel like I'm at like a AA meeting or something. So the classic Invitational was this weekend, and I'm recording my deck tech video after the fact. I guess I just didn't get to recording it beforehand. But anyway, I thought I would describe this wonderful deck that I played before you watch videos, should you decide to. The deck is, at its core, what they call fish decks in Classic. As far as I can tell, any like hate bearish style deck is just called fish. At least that's what the folks on Classic Quarter are calling them. So this is a 4-color hate bear fish deck, and it features City of Brass and Cavern of Souls to facilitate its greedy spell colors, and then also a set of Lotus Petals to act as one-shot Moxen. Give the deck a little bit of a boost, because in Classic, if you're not doing something somewhat unfair, excuse me, then you're probably losing. So what does this deck try to do that is unfair? Well, it tries to cast creatures that make your opponent really sad. AJ and I talked a lot going into the Invitational about what decks were good in the format and metagaming against those decks. So, based off the 4th Classic Quarter qualifier, or Classic Quarter Invitational qualifier, it was clear that Affinity and Stacks style workshop decks. Actually, maybe this is a point that someone wants to clarify in the comments, but are there other workshop decks now that are beyond Affinity and Stacks? Like the more rampy 6-drop plus decks, are those not considered really stacks? Like what distinguishes a workshop deck from the stacks or the affinity varieties? Anyway, so we thought that those would be both the most prevalent decks and the best decks. They've historically done well in Classic, and Mishra's Workshop is definitely one of the most unfair cards in the format. And then also we knew that Oath would be good. Oath is kind of inconsistent, even though it does do well quite regularly. So I'm really sorry about the coughing, and hopefully I don't just die at some point from it. Maybe I should go see the doctor again, because I've had this cough for way too long. But the Oath decks were something that we knew that we'd have to be prepared for too. And AJ loves looking for cards that fit into the archetype paradigm of Classic as like silver bullets. So knowing that we'd want to be able to beat these two decks and then have some game against like a Delver style deck or other fish decks, he started looking at cards and found Hammer Mage, which is really the reason that I played this deck. AJ also plays a Hammer Mage deck, and we even had some other decks that had Hammer Mage in them. Blue-Red Control, Mono-Red. I even was working on a survival deck that had Hammer Mage in it, so you can kind of see that this is really the card that we really wanted to play. And then once I decided that I was going to be playing Hammer Mage, I built a Mono-Red version of a Hammer Mage deck and played 4 Magus of the Moon and 4 Blood Moons in it, and then quickly decided that I definitely wanted to play Blood Moon effects. And you'll notice that in my match videos, I call it Magus of the Moon the whole time. Not quite sure who put that idea in my head that that's how it should be pronounced, but it's definitely Magus of the Moon. So, the deck. It plays pretty much just what I consider to be the best disruptive fish creatures, and then Trinket Mages, mostly to find 2 cards, Grafdigger's Cage and Engineered Explosives. The creature set has lots of anti-artifact. We have Trigons, Pride Mages, and Hammer Mages. And then also Meddling Mage to just stop the most troublesome artifacts. Probably Lodestone, Wormcoil, Phyrexian Revoker. Like a Meddling Mage on Revoker and a Hammer Mage can just lock Affinity out of the game. And then like Wormcoil Engine is pretty problematic, and Duplicant can be quite annoying. And then the Hierarchs give you some power. The Exalted actually helps the deck close out games because your guys become better than 2/2s or 2x's. And the mana, while not quite being like a Mox from Vintage, is a pretty powerful effect, ramping your mana for 1 mana and making it wasteland proof and artifact destruction proof. So then the Meddling Mages in the Classic League event or any of the Classic League events are wonderful because you get to see deck lists beforehand. So you actually get perfect information of what your opponent could have in their hand, or what cards they could play that could ruin your game plan. And that makes the card, along with like Cabal Therapy and Pithing Needle, a lot more powerful in this format than they normally would be. Otherwise, if I couldn't look at my opponent's deck list, it would be very hard for me to cast Meddling Mages against non-workshop decks. Because pretty much against workshop decks, I'm naming Lodestone, or a lot of times I'm naming Lodestone, and the cards beyond that would come more to what I know based on prior knowledge in the match or prior tournaments. And then like I said, the mages basically just get explosives and cages. They can also get Lotus Petals, which are quite fine under a Blood Moon, or if you need to get your Hammer Mage up to like X equals 4, X equals 6, you can go find Lotus Petals or Mana Crypt to do that. And then there's also a Skull Clamp, which gives the deck like a more proactive Meddling Mage target, where the cage, or not Meddling Mage, Trinket Mage target, where the cage and the explosives are more reactive. And then there's a 3 of swords in here, just because I wanted some removal in it. Almost all of the Hammer Mage decks we played had some removal, and like lightning bolts or swords. And swords, while giving your opponent some extra life, just says goodbye to anything, and it like so makes Wormcoil, recursive creatures, and stuff like Blightsteel go away, which are all problems for the deck. The mana base is probably the most ambitious part of this deck. The City of Brass and the Caverns are really what allow the deck to even try to function, because you're casting like a green card into a blue-white card into a red card in some matches, and then once you cast the red card, all of your lands become mountains except for these 3 basics. So the deck has like a very strange mana game, and games can easily be lost by just fetching the wrong land. I designed it to operate under a Magus of the Moon, and that's why you have 3 different basics. None of them are excuse me. None of them are mountains, and then fetches that can go find both these basics. I doubled down on green because I thought that green would be the number 1 land that I want to have with a moon effect in play, so I could cast a Noble Hierarch and then unlock all of my colors. Probably Plains is pretty close too, because it casts both Pride Mage and Meddling Mage. And then the green also got a nod because because I definitely want to be able to cast Noble Hierarch on turn 1, and depending on the deck my opponent is playing, sometimes I want to get a Wasteland proof land, which would be a forest, and sometimes I want to get a forest to get around Magus that I'll be casting on turn 2. Then the 5 dual lands are in there. We have one of each of the primary colors, and then a white red and a green red. The red's important to actually activate the Hammer Mage if you don't have the Magus in play. So really you only have 12 sources of red that can activate Hammer Mage, even though you can cast it with Cavern. That can be problematic given that Wasteland is in the format. A lot of times you'll want to like cast a Hammer Mage off a Cavern and sandbag the red source until you can play it and activate the Hammer Mage, so you don't just get wastelanded and lose your ability to activate it. Then with the land all considered, it affected the sideboard construction a little bit, but not a whole lot. Mostly the sideboard is a bunch of cards to deal, or to allow you to tweak the deck to play against any matchup. We knew that Oath would be really hard because the Trigon can't affect the Oath if the Trigon wasn't in play before the Oath. And then they still have like Lotus Petals to cast Oaths through Magus of the Moon. So even like a turn 1 or turn 2 Magus wouldn't necessarily lock an Oath player out of the game. That's why there's a complete set of Grafdigger's Cage after board, including the one in the main, and also some Leyline, since Leyline turns off Oath, gives you hexproof, they can't target you, and then their Oath won't be able to check to see if you as a player have more creatures than them. And then you also get like red blasts against Oath. Explosives can be brought in, but they're not really for the Oath matchup. They're more against like additional fish style decks, because this deck has a very good disruptive creature base, but doesn't have a very good combat oriented creature base. Like the Tarmogoyf and Knight of the Reliquary and Scavenging Ooze decks all can tangle with creatures much better than this deck can. This deck is meant to make shop cry. So I'm not actually sure how the like junk style fish decks do against shop. Obviously Duranoth did really well and made it deep into the tournament, but just in general, I think that like a creature base like this is a little bit better against shop style decks. Then the Pithing Needle is like good against Dredge, fine against like the decks that play several copies of Jace. You can shut off like Vault Key with it, and it's a card that I've really grown to like in Classic, especially Classic League with the deck lists, and AJ kind of has talked me into playing it a lot. You can even bring it in and use it against like Tangle Wires, stop Staff of Domination, etc. And then the Pithing Needle, the Cages, and the Crypt are all in there against Dredge. Maybe Explosives too, because it kills the zombie tokens. The Red Blasts are obviously good against any deck that plans on casting a decent amount of blue cards. Both Oath that might cast blue cards to protect its Oath, or Tinker or Brainstorm, and Delver decks, and then like the Jacer Raider style decks. And then there is a triplet of Seeds of Innocence, which is just Wrath of Artifacts. Super discussing. It and Hammer Mage give this deck a lot of sources to make, or a lot of opportunities to make all the artifacts on the battlefield to go away. So, I hope that my matches aren't too arduous to sit through. Hopefully you guys can see how the deck plays out and give me some comments on how you might think about improving it or switching it depending on the metagame. Oh, also, still looking for ways to interact better with the Oath. Spoilers. Thank you.